testing strobe light tubes or light heads. I've had some questions about what I use to test and evaluate strobe bulbs, or tubes rather, that I get. And I have a few basic supplies that I use for a variety of reasons for different types of tubes. The first one is testing a single tube, and this is a single unit out of a System 11 ambulance power supply rack, and it's meant to flash one max beam strobe. So testing a single lamp, this is a great way to do it. This is double flash, and the other nice thing about this is because it's out of the ambulance system, it has a external trigger wire that could be used to trigger the power supply to synchronize it, but in my case I can use it to trigger the tube as frequently as I want. So that's a nice option of this one. It's one head, so I don't need to find a mate for whatever I'm testing, and I can challenge the tube a little bit by making it fire out of sync or early, if you will. See how it does. So I often use that for single tubes. A lot of times for older PAR 36, that'll be my go-to. The next one is a Dash Master 2 double strobe 2-head unit, and this one is mounted such that I have set it up with a switch, and the switch puts it into a rapid rate mode. This is great for testing a set of 2 strobe heads where I think one of them is weaker and starting to misfire. I can hook them up together, and then I can put it between normal and rapid rate, and I can see if I can induce a misfire. This also has a cutoff, so I can cut off one of the tubes and only have one fire. So that can be for comparison as well. This is the rapid rate function. It's just a push of a button. It puts it into the rapid rate from standard. And it can be a good way to kind of sort out if you have one tube that's failing. And also, it's a relatively low power supply, so it doesn't really overtax any smaller or weak bulbs. In this case, I'm using PAR 36 strobes, and I will eventually use some Micromax 2 here. So not giant, but not tiny really. So neither would be a problem, but that's a good option for testing smaller strobes in comparison to one another. This is a Piercer 2 power supply, kind of sandwiched in there, which is a rapid single strobe power supply, 2-head. And what I've done is I have wired in a potentiometer so that I can adjust the single flash rate from pretty much the maximum of the device all the way down to a slow sort of standard single flash. And this can be good for a variety of things, but I often use it just to get a baseline test on a bulb, or if I've tried some different lenses or lens configurations, this gives me the ability to fine-tune the rate without changing the pattern, so I can see how it looks at slow and rapid rates, again, without changing the pattern. A lot of times in other situations you would have to change the pattern to change if you change the rate. So this remains single flash, but the rate is variable with the dial, which is extremely handy in a variety of testing circumstances. So this is something I made just out of that Piercer 2 power supply and a potentiometer. So this is an Edge power supply, and it has a pattern selection dial. It can support 6 heads, up to 6 heads, and I have it wired so that I can use the dial to select pattern, but I have a little hot lead with a clip coming off to go to the high power setting lead, as well as the switching for different groups of strobe heads leads. So I can plug all of those in. I don't have to bring them back and touch them to the power in alligator clip, because I have that red clip right here in my hands. And usually I connect the gray wire, which ups the power, and then whichever outlets I'm using, I would enable those as well. And then this dial lets me change between Comet double single and sequential flash, I believe. Usually I use Comet and sequential, but testing in double can be good as well. It's a little bit more rapid double. So that's a good testing device as well. This is an adjustable UPS 64C, or an early Comet strobe power supply, and I put holes in the side to adjust the clipping, which is the power cutoff, as well as the rate, just using the factory trim pots or the factory potentiometers that were already there. So I can adjust those things with the factory equipment without opening the power supply up. This is in Comet Flash, so this is an adjustable rate Comet Flash. So there can be some benefits to adjusting the rate of a Comet Flash power supply versus adjusting the rate of a double flash or single flash. So this gives me the option to adjust my Comet Flash rate between what I would call a slow standard all the way up to about what the rapid quad flash pattern on some later power supplies was. So it's easy to adjust. There's just a little trim pot in there. You stick the screwdriver in and just adjust it as you see fit. And I use this occasionally, especially if I have a bulb that I think is starting to misfire, but I can't figure out at what point. I found that Comet Flash is a very good pattern to cause a bulb misfire. So sometimes just dialing Comet Flash up and down rate-wise is enough to induce that bulb failure that has been intermittent. So it's useful for that, and it has an enclosure. The other adjustment is clipping, which is essentially the power level at which the charge cuts off. And depending on the rate you're at, this can be a little bit more influential than other times. But if you've dialed in a rate, sometimes you'll dial this in just to make the failure happen a little bit sooner. So you just kind of play with it and see how that works then. So that's a nice enclosed power supply for that. My next power supply is an altered factory power supply, which was 6 head, but I've changed it to 4. And what it does is it gives me the ability to run different wattages or outputs to the strobe heads. You can run 2 at a time, and depending on what you select, you can run 60 watts or 30 each, 40 watts or 20 each, or 20 watts or 10 each, which 30 each is on the high end of what you'd want to do with a strobe head, and 10 is on the low end of effectiveness. So, and 20 is probably about normal. Each 40 or 20 each or 40 is about normal. So this lets me test bulbs or tubes rather at the power levels which might be on the low and high ends of what they should be tolerating. I have to be careful that I don't damage a delicate tube doing this. But on the other hand, if I have usually a big linear tube that I think is starting to have problems with brightness or borderline failures, sometimes seeing it at different power levels is what does it for me to decide that I do want to discard the tube. So just seeing the differences between the different energy levels probably doesn't show up as well as it does in person, but going back and forth between 20 and 60 I think here is noticeable. But that's what I use this supply for, is just straight wattage output testing, to test only wattage. And this is a Tomar preemption power supply, and this essentially just tests a higher output rate with a higher output wattage together, and it can just be a stress test. I don't use this as much as I used to now that I have the other power supplies, but it is an option. And then we've seen the power supply here before, but the tester here is a strobe tester, It has little lamps that light up in the pattern, which I think is hard to see here, of the pattern of the power supply you're testing. So you could test the power supply without hooking up tubes. So I do have quite a few things to test strobe tubes with. I also have quite a few different tubes that I can test supplies with, which I didn't picture. And I have a whole set of flashers and halogen light heads to test both sides of that equation, which I'll probably show later. But that's all for now. Thanks. Have a good day.